The following is a presentation of the Fellowship Church at Anthem, a community of faith, love, and hope. For more information, please visit fellowshipanthem.com.
Well, good morning, everybody. How you guys doing? A little chilly today, isn't it? Here in the Valley of the Fun. Hey, Jim, that was cool. You were sitting back there on the drums, and you were all illuminated back there. How'd that happen? Illuminated back there.
I know.
I like that. Yeah. So, with the advent of touch technology, someone one day in a cold part of the country. How many of you have friends and relatives like in Boston, Connecticut today? They're digging out, man, like feet of snow. But somebody in a cold part of the country took their smartphone out and began to try to text with it. And because they had their gloves on, they recognized that the gloves were not allowing their fingers to create conductivity to the smartphone. And so it was a completely frustrating moment when they took their smartphone and because they couldn't text with it, threw it into the snowbank. And at that point, all hope was lost. All people that live in cold climates would no longer be able to text with their smartphones. Until one day someone said there has to be a better way. And they began to think differently about the capacity of our fingers to generate electricity through gloves. Because the thought of changing all of the touch technology to match the gloves wasn't going to work, right? But the idea that maybe we could change the gloves so that the gloves would actually transmit the electricity through our fingers and through the tips of the gloves onto the touch technology. Well, that was a revolutionary thought. Maybe not as revolutionary as the light bulb or the automobile, but in our generation, a revolutionary thought, no doubt. And so, someone says, what would it be like if the first two fingers and the thumb on both hands of the glove were suddenly embedded with the material that allowed your fingers to connect right through the glove to the touch screen? And now we have, how many of you know this? How many of you knew we have touch screen sensitive gloves? Others of you are like, this is revolutionary. Ted, you've changed my life today. If I would have been thinking clearly, we would have these for sale today, right outside there, for the low price of $149.95. But somebody thought differently, and so consequently today, we can now use our touch-sensitive devices right through our gloves as long as we have our touch gloves on. All because somebody was willing to think a little bit differently. It would have been really easy for everybody just to go, oh, that'll never happen. Never happen. If you're going to text with your smartphone in the cold weather, you're just going to have frostbite. That's all there is to it. But someone was willing to think differently. And that was one of our deep dive action steps for the new year. Learn to think differently. We talked a little bit about it last week and the importance of learning to think outside of yourself. And today I want to talk to you specifically about how you can learn to think differently about yourself. One of the recent studies that the Harvard Business Review did on entrepreneurs was, after they did studies with 5,000 of them, they began to realize that if we could associate things with certain sides of our brain and then connect those associations, that new possibilities would come up that we'd never previously imagined. Now, most of us are aware that the left side of our brain is the logic and processing side of our brain. And the right side of our brain is the creative and energy-based side of our brain. Most of us are one side or the other dominant. Some of us are left brain dominant, so it's very easy for us to think sequentially. It's very easy for us to think about logic flowing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some of us are dominant on the right side, and it's easier for you to see the universe as a connected entity. It's easier for you to generate art and creativity. And what we're now knowing is that we actually have the capacity, with a little bit of focus and a little bit of attention, to create a great blend between those two hemispheres of our brain. So much so that we can create increased electronic connections across those two hemispheres. So if you find yourself as a logic-based, sort of non-emotional, non-creative person, with a little bit of practice, with some repeated intentional engagement, you can become a lot more creative. And if you are a creative, and your whole life people have looked at you and said, why can't you just be on time? Or why can't you just write something down and remember it? And you're like, I don't know. With a little bit of focus and a little bit of intentional energy, you can actually become more sequential, more logical, more patterned in your thought and in your action. The challenge for us is that intentional engagement requires a lot of effort, because we default automatically to that dominant side of our brain. It amazes me the technology that we can now measure certain things in terms of the way our brains function. Did you know that they figured out where the flavor centers are registered in your brain and on your tongue? And so they've actually created a capacity. They can make food that will activate the heat sensors on your tongue and in your brain, even though it's cold food. Something right out of the refrigerator, you put it in your mouth and you go, wow, that's hot. Well, it's not really hot, but it activated something in your tongue that went up to your brain and said, hey, brain, this is hot. Spit it out. And your brain will go back to your tongue and go, oh, wow, that is hot, even though it wasn't really hot. All because of the power of what they now know about the way our brains function. And we think about our brains and we think about our minds, and we've been talking about how God created us to be triune beings, body, mind, and spirit. And those three are connected, although they are often, in religious context, disconnected. We come to church to talk about our spirits or our souls. But the Bible has a whole lot to say about our bodies and the way our bodies work. And the Bible has a lot to say about our minds and the way our minds work. In fact, look at this passage of Scripture. This is Philippians chapter 2, verse 5. It says, let the same mind or thought processes or mode of thinking be in you that was also in Jesus Christ. Have you ever thought about the capacity that you and I have to think like Jesus thought? I know some of you right now are thinking about your spouses and you're like, that's not possible. He does not have the capacity to think like Jesus thought. No way. The Bible says that we actually have the ability to engage the same thought processes, the same mental framework, the same understanding models of life that Jesus thought. So how do we get there? How do we become more like Jesus in the way that we think? All right, let me give you a couple of really practical steps today about your thinking. First of all, this is the first step in the process. It's about observing your thoughts. Observing your thoughts. All right, I want you to do a little exercise with me right now. I love to do this to people sort of unsuspecting, but I want you to get in your mind right now. Just what are you thinking about right now? See, if you let's be honest with ourselves. If some of you thought about what you were thinking about, you were not at all thinking about me and what I was saying. You were thinking about lunch. You were thinking about work tomorrow. You were thinking about the ball game, you were thinking about your kids, you were thinking about something completely other than what's going on in this room right here. Now, what happens to us often is we don't stop to observe what we're actually thinking about until something sort of like goes, hey, what are you thinking about right now? When someone says to us, hey, think about what you're thinking about, we're like, oh, gosh, I was thinking about something else. We call that metacognition, thinking about your thinking. And unless we are intentional in that activity, we won't default to that. We won't do that automatically. You know, all the time in my life, I'm constantly becoming more and more aware of the way my mind's working and what I'm thinking about. And this past week, we had some automobile challenges in the Baird household, which is always one of the fun, adventures of our life. But I was like trying to get Peg's van started, and it didn't want to really start well. And I thought it was this. It might have been the battery. No, it's probably the fuel pump and all that. And so finally, I just, in a moment of exasperation, I'm like, stupid van. And then I had this moment of metacognition. I started thinking about what I was thinking about while I was sitting there clicking it, stupid van. And I'm like, this van does not have the capacity to be stupid. So why would I ascribe a cognitive attribute to this van? This van doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have any emotional center. And yet, I'm talking about this van like it was a person. In fact, I'm talking to this van as if it was a person. You, because I thought back, and I'm like, I didn't say stupid van, I said, you stupid van. Not until we slow down long enough to think about what we're thinking do we actually begin to gain the advantage to change the way that we think. It's the first step in the process. It's rising above our thoughts. It's moving from the thinker to the watcher. It's one step back. Stupid van. Hang on a second. Why do I think the van is stupid? This van doesn't have the capacity to be stupid. I'm frustrated at a completely inanimate object. Stupid van driver. Right? It's a move. It's a subtle shift in thought processes from the thinker to the watcher. Here's an action step for you to help you think about what you think about. Write your thoughts down. This is one of the benefits of journaling. Just write your thoughts down. If we look through the pages of the Bible, one of the things that we notice is that much of what is written in the Bible were thoughts about life. That's why I like reading the Psalms a lot. I like reading David's thoughts. He thought a lot about life, and he wrote those thoughts down. And there was something therapeutic in them. There was something valuable because he would reflect back on them. He would think about God, and he'd write about God. God, you're awesome. You're amazing. Thank you, God, for being so great. Thank you for blessing my life. Thank you for being the God of blessing and favor. And in writing those thoughts down, it became this healing moment for him. Sometimes it was a painful moment. Sometimes he would write about feeling abandoned by God. Sometimes he would write about feeling, completely left alone and utterly cast out. And he would have this dialogue with his own thoughts and with his heart. God, why have you walked away from me? And he would write it down. It's the value of writing our thoughts down. Solomon wrote a lot of his thoughts down. Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived and the richest man that ever lived, and yet he's also the man that would write thoughts like emptiness. Emptiness. All of life is completely empty. This is a man that had billions of dollars in today's currency, the attention of the entire world at that time, over 700 wives. That might have been part of the challenge for him, I don't know, but he thought about life, and he wrote his thoughts down, and those thoughts would then become opportunity for reflection. So write your thoughts down. We have too many opportunities to capture our thoughts now. You can speak them into your phone. You can type them onto your phone. Some of you right now, you're typing notes down about this talk that I'm giving so you can look back on it, think back on it. What if you began to journal on your phone? I was talking with someone this week that was using a phone app that I recommended a couple weeks ago about gratitude. It's a gratitude app. And every time you look at it, it reminds you of what you're thankful for because you enter it in. Maybe you want to write a journal. I was speaking with someone this week, and they're like, I just started a journal. I'm writing my thoughts down, and they're like, I don't even know if I'm doing it right. If you're writing them down, you're doing it right. Just write down what you're thinking. It's interesting sometimes to me when I flip back through my journals and I look at stuff that I wrote a few years ago or a decade ago, or I was reading back through a letter recently that I wrote to myself when one of my kids was born. I was like, wow, it's amazing to look back and think about what I was thinking about. So that's the first step. You have to observe your own thoughts. Here's the second piece to changing the way you think. You have to identify the problem patterns of thought. Now, part of the reason why some of our lives don't operate properly is because we don't think properly about life. You say it again. Part of the reason why some of our lives don't work properly is because we don't think properly about our lives. What happens to us is over time we develop patterns of thought, habits of thought, patterns that determine the way we're going to think about certain issues of our life. And those patterns of thought become so deeply embedded in our thinking processes, so deeply rooted. And they're no longer in our conscious thought, they're in our subconscious thought, what I call the automatic part of our brain. It's the biggest part of your thinking center, so much that when an activity or a circumstance enters your sphere of understanding and reality, you don't even have to think about it. It's like it just comes naturally right out of your automatic brain, and thoughts are that way too. Something bad happens, like the van won't start, and it's really easy to just go into an automatic mode of thought. Stupid van. Or, this always happens to me. Right? Let me give you a couple automatic patterns of thought. Here's one pattern of poor thought. It's pessimism. People like this, they're just pessimistic all the time. Everything in their life is seen through a dark cloud. Oh, that's going to be bad. Oh, no. Look at a phone call coming in. Oh, can't take that. Everything's bad. Glass half full kind of people, but this is their whole pattern of thought. Everything that happens in their life is rooted in a negative thought. Now, I've come to believe that a lot of that negative thought actually creates more negativity in their life. They attract it to themselves. So pessimism can be a negative, poor pattern of thought. Here's another poor pattern of thought. Extremism. This comes up a lot of times in our relationships, right? Well, you always, or you never. And when you're taking up this sort of extreme argument with somebody who's a left brain logic thinker, they automatically go into calculation mode. Right? So when you say never, I remember last Tuesday at 3:30 when I actually did do what you say I never do. Therefore, the entire basis of your whole argument is discounted, and you therefore are invalid. People like that? Or you always, right? Or you're just like. It's an extreme. That extremism is a poor pattern of thought. Here's another ism. Judgmentalism. Right? What happens in judgmentalism is I look at you and I determine whatever is wrong with you without recognizing that I'm actually connected to you. It's the me versus you mentality. I look at you, I see your faults, I see where you've messed up, I see your mistakes, but I can't see my own because my focus is almost exclusively on you. And so it's always me against you. But what I don't understand is that when I judge you without incorporating the me that form the we of all of life, I'm always going to misjudge. Always. Judgmentalism is an extreme pattern of poor thought in our lives. And our culture today it's a big piece in our culture. We have to see the interconnected nature of reality that exists in humanity. Here's one more. Blameism. That's not a real word, but I wanted it to match the previous three. So in your dictionary of all things Ted Baird, please note a new word, blameism. And blameism is the chronic blaming of others for all of the bad things going on in my life. It's never my fault. It's always locating blame somewhere outside of myself. Never taking responsibility for the difficult situations in my life, but always blaming somebody else. And there's a lot of people we blame, right? We blame our parents. Oh, it's my parents' fault. They taught me to think like this. Taught me to act like this. We blame our spouses sometimes. Oh, it's his fault. It's her fault. Blame our kids. If those kids weren't so, then I wouldn't be so agitated all the time. Darn kids. I know. It is our kids' fault, really. Sometimes we blame God, don't we? Well, God, if you really loved me, you wouldn't let me be going through this. God, if you're really who these religious people say you were, this wouldn't be happening in my life. We blame everybody except ourselves, and that quickly moves us into the victim mode of life. You know, we often say in practical applications of life that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I think the same thing applies to our cognition, to our thinking. If we keep thinking in the same patterns of thought over and over and over, blaming, judging, moving to extremes, thinking negatively, if we keep thinking in those same patterns and we expect our life to get better, guess what? We might actually be insane. So we have to go all the way back to the beginning. We have to change the way that we think. And it begins by observing yourself. And then it moves into identifying the problem patterns of thought. Only then can I actually then begin to change what I think about, which is the third step. So I look and I go, wow, look at how I'm thinking. I move from the thinker to the watcher. Look at what I'm thinking about. And then I find some faults. Wow, I'm really thinking negatively. I think negatively a lot. Or I think pessimistically a lot. Or I'm a blamer. And then once we identify those patterns of thought that are bad, that are negative, then we can begin to change what we think. That's the third step in the process. You have to change what you think about. We have this little phrase, this little saying in the world of nutrition. You are what you eat. Right? And that's true. What if it's true that we are what we think? Right? What if it's true we are what we think? You know, we can't often see the immediate effects of nutrition. I did not know that for the better part of 35, 7, 8, 9 something years of my life, that the joy of cheese dip going into my body was having adverse effects on all of my body. Because there's not an immediate effect. If I could have taken a chip, dipped it in the cheese, put it in my mouth, and immediately, swallowed it, and then boom, right here, there's a big pooch. My God, what is that? Cheese dip. I'd have stopped eating it a long time ago, right? But it doesn't work like that. But it is true. You are what you eat. Your body turns into whatever it is you put in it. Same thing is true with your mind. You are what you think. Whatever you think about, you become, you live out. You think about negative things, your life's negative. Is it any wonder? You think about painful things, your mind focused on all the pain of life, and you live out more pain. Is it any wonder? It's just the way it works, guys. You are what you think. Here's the biblical support for it. It's all the way back in one of those Old Testament book of Proverbs. As a man thinks, so he becomes. You are what you think. So you have to change what you think about. And the only way to get there is to step all the way back to the beginning. Observe your thoughts, and then identify the problem thoughts, and replace those problem thoughts with all kinds of new thoughts. If you, in the process of observing your thought and identifying the challenging thoughts for you, if you identify that you are like a chronic negative thinker, then what you have to do is you have to attack that. Not by saying, I'm never going to think negative again. You have to attack it by thinking positively. You have to build positivity into your mind. If you're a pessimist, you have to build hope into your mind. If you're a doubter, you got to build belief into your mind. Whatever it is that is negative in your mind, you have to attack that with something very, very positive. And that takes a lot of habit, a lot of practice, a lot of intentionality, because when you think about it, whatever negative patterns of thought we identify, they have been going on in our minds for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of our life. So much so that for the most part, they are unobserved now. We don't even think about it. We're driving down the freeway, and the crazy driver that's always out to get us just magically shows up. And there they are, speeding around us, slamming on the brakes. And what do we say? There they are again. Who are they? I don't know. But they're always in my life. Why? Why? Maybe the process that I think about my driving affects the way people around me drive. So what is it in your mind right now that negatively and adversely affects your life that tracks all the way back to a pattern of thought that's deeply rooted in who you are? Right? So change the what it is that you think about. And here's the last piece, guys. Only then can you change the way that you think. That's the final piece. So I observe my thoughts. I move from the thinker to the watcher. I identify the negative, problematic patterns of behavior of my thought, and I go, wow, that's not a very good way to think about life. Or that's a cruddy way to think about my relationships. Or I shouldn't think that way about myself. Could be thoughts of shame, could be thoughts of unworth. I shouldn't think that way. Once we identify those, we begin to repattern them by changing what we think about. And over time, we build new patterns so that we actually begin to change the way that we think. You ever been around someone that just habitually thinks great? I mean, like you bring up something negative and they just immediately find the positive spin. And if you're a highly negative person, you look at people like that and you go, they're demented. They just, something's wrong with them. But if you peel away the layers a little bit, you look deep down inside and you go, you know what, I wish I could be like that. I wish I could look at life like that. I wish I could think like that. The brain research indicates that you can. You can learn to think differently than what you think currently right now. You can. Like, no, I can't. You're right, you can't. You shouldn't try. But the rest of you can. If you don't think you can change the way you think, then you won't. There has to be a sliver of opportunity in your mind where you actually begin to think, I might be able to think differently about this. This past week I had this clearly illustrated to me in a really clear way. It changed my way of thinking. I grew up in Oklahoma, and we grew a lot of things in Oklahoma that we ate. My grandparents had farms and gardens and things like that, and it was always fun to sort of watch things grow up from seeds and see them, grow into something that you could step out into the garden and harvest and take into the house and cook and eat. And there's only a couple things that over the course of my lifetime I've never really enjoyed eating. One is onions. I still don't really enjoy onions. They used to make me throw up, but I overcame that. Because every 7 years your taste buds change, right? You know that? And that's why, you should always try new things. And so onions were always one of those things for me. Radishes. I haven't found a good use for radishes yet. used to pick them out and throw them at my brother, which that was a good use for them, but that was the only good use I could find. And then something else that I never could really find an appreciation for were beets. Right? Beets. I just call them dirts. They taste like dirt to me. I don't like beets. Never have liked beets. I just can't acquire the taste of dirt. And I've tried. I really have. I'm like, these beets, because they're beautiful, right? They're like beautiful kind of like purple, deep, rich purple color. And I'm like, man, those look like they should taste great. They do not. I was in Argentina one time, and we were sitting down to dinner at this table with this family, and they served us beets. And you're supposed to eat whatever's set in front of you, particularly in a cross-cultural situation. And so I thought, I'm going to get a little bit of beets just so they know that I'm not rude, and I'll eat the beets even though I don't like to eat dirt. I'm going to go ahead and eat these beets. So I ate the beets, and my translator that was with me, they asked him, how do you like the meal? And I didn't speak Spanish, and so he said, he asked me, how do you like the meal? And I said, I love the meal. This is really, really good. And he said to them, in something in Spanish that I didn't understand. And the next thing I know, there were more beets showing up at the table. He told them I loved everything, especially the beets. They brought me more beets. So this week we were out to dinner with some friends, and we sat down at the table, and one of the specials was a beet salad. And I was like, I'm not doing it. Tried dirt before, still don't like dirt, not doing dirt. And our server, he tried to really sell them hard. He's like, no, they're locally grown. They come from certain farm here in the valley, and they're very, very good. And I was like, no, they're not. Because they don't make good beets. So Peg decides she's going to order the beet salad because apparently she likes dirt. So she orders the beet salad, comes to the table. It's got lettuce and other things, and then the beets. And I look over, and I'm like, those beets are not purple. They were kind of like golden colored. I was like, what is this all about? And all of a sudden, I hear her over there, making enjoyment noises with her beet salad. It's like, what has she got going on over there with the dirt clods, Finally, she says, you got to try these. And I have lived with her long enough and known her to be far wiser than me that I finally just said, all right, I'm going to try the beets. I'm going to try the dirt. And so I did. I tried the beets. And I'm going to tell you guys, I thought I was having a God moment. My perspective on beets radically changed just like that. These were unlike any other beets I'd ever had in my life. They were tender. They were rich. They were sweet. There was only a hint of dust in them. But it changed my whole way of thinking. Like, all right, you know what? If they can make beets like that, if God can make beets that taste like that, He is a good God. And I will try beets again. Sometimes only the process of experimenting with our new thoughts will actually change the way that we think. We got to get in the trenches. And it's hard work. That's why Paul writes to us about our methodology of thinking, our way of thinking, and he gives us some things to think about. In Philippians chapter 4, look at what he says about what we should think about. Keep your minds thinking about. Just pay attention to that very first phrase. Keep your minds thinking about. In other words, you got to control what you think about. And I want you to think habitually, think repeatedly about these things. Just focus on this stuff. Keep thinking about it. Think about whatever is true. Have you ever, when you get to a place where you actually step back from your thoughts and you examine what it is you're thinking about, you might hold up one of the thoughts that you habitually and repeatedly think, and you go, you know what? That's not even true. If I over time think about myself and I go, you know what? I'm not worthy to be loved. I'm not worthy of connection. I'm not worthy of God's love. I'm not worthy. I hold that thing up. I go, you know what? That's not true. So I replace it with something true. I'm like, man, I'm so worthy of love because God gave His Son so that I could experience His love. That's true. Whatever is respected, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever can be loved, even beats, and whatever is well thought of, if there's anything good and there's anything worth giving thanks for, here's the practice of gratitude again, guys. Think about these things. Think about these things. It's possible to change the way that you think. And it's not an easy process. But the benefits of altering the way that we think and beginning to think like Jesus thinks about all of life, it can literally change our life.